Uh, Today we have two of the teachers from the English department talking, Professor Drishti Rakhra and Professor Maya Phillip. Professor Maya Phillip will be talking about understanding home truths and hometowns and home truths. And Professor Drishti Rakhra will be talking about writing in July. First, we will have Professor Maya Phillip. Maya is a very interesting person because um, you'll be having a very normal conversation with her, and then suddenly she'll say something very wise, and then the conversation will continue very normally. And every time I talk to her, I end up feeling very happy because I don't know, she just makes me happy. So this is so I'm very excited for this. All the
Maya
best,
is
Professor
a
Maya.
very
Over to you.
Thank you so much, Shefali, for that very, very sweet introduction. I have never thought of myself that way, but thank you for sharing it with us. Uh, Good evening, everyone. I'm really happy to be before you and talk about some of the things that I find interesting and like. A word of gratitude to our Department of English for giving me the platform to share these insights with all of you. So I hope whatever I share with you during this session will be insightful and will help you understand perhaps if not what I'm talking about, me a little bit more than usual. So thank you so much for that. Like Shefali ma'am mentioned, I will be talking about the title Understanding Hometowns and Home Truths through a novel that I read during the lockdown. Okay, so just give me a minute. I'll just share my screen and start my slide. I hope my screen is visible.
yeah.
Yes, Maya.
Okay, great. Okay. So as you can see before you, there is the title of my talk, that is Understanding Hometowns and Home Truths. And then under that in smaller font, some stray thoughts on Sarah Joseph's or the book. I gave it that subtitle because that's exactly what this is all about, because some of the insights that I gained while I was reading this particular Malayalam novel is what I wanted to share with you in this evening. So first about why I chose this novel, what prompted my choice, right? So Sarah Joseph's Odappu is a Malayalam novel. It's written in Malayalam, and one of the reasons why I picked up that book was because it was just there in my household waiting to be read. Okay. Usually what happens when I start reading literatures from my own mother tongue, to take the examples of some of the books that are there in my house, in the very first page, there is a language that I am very, very unfamiliar with. Okay, it's what somebody would say tough Malayalam. And after reading the one page with a lot of difficulty, I would end up closing that book and keeping it aside. But my previous experience with Sarah Joseph had taught me that she will have something to offer, that her language wouldn't be so alien to me. Unlike those other texts, difficult texts that were there in my house, whose Malayalam was something that I've never seen in the Manorama paper, or even while in the prayer books, or even in our day-to-day conversations. So apart from the attraction that I had towards the book's very, very special Malayalam, the author had a significant role to play in my choice. Okay, her name is Sarah Joseph. I do not know if many of you are familiar with her, but she is a very, very popular figure in Kerala. She writes stories and novels in Malayalam, and I've seen her from young participating in a lot of newsroom discussions. So that's a face that I was extremely familiar with. And I've read some of her short stories, and also I've read her classic famed piece, that is Alahede Penmakkal, which did in fact tell me that I'm going to miss something if I do not end up reading Odappu. So I'd like to start off, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the author. So this is her right here. She is from Thrissur. She's a well-known activist as well. You would see her at the forefront of a lot of agitations and protests. She got married at a very, very young age. And she carried forth with her education even after her marriage and ultimately became a professor of Malayalam at Sanskrit College in Pattambi. She was the founder of a non-governmental organization of the name Manushi. She also joined the Aam Aadmi Party in 2014, contested in the Thrissur constituency and lost, and left the party also. She's been known as a communist sympathizer, and she's also famous for returning her Sahitya Academy Award in 2015. And you can also see some of the famous works of hers titled Pabatara, Alahede Penmakkal, Mattati, Odappu, and Ramayana Kadakal. There is a lot more, but these are the ones that are actually famous. Odappu is not that famous, but since we are talking about it, I just put it in that list, and it's part of a trilogy, like it's mentioned in the slide. Okay, so the author was in fact an attractive reason for me to pick up the book. Okay, so apart from all these reasons, I had an additional reason, and I'm going to show you the front page of the book. Okay, I'm sorry to all those of you who cannot read in Malayalam. So this part in black is her name, Sarah Joseph, and the part in the red is the name of the novel, Odappu. And as you can see, the prominent image before you is that of a cassock. The kind of clothing that our priests and nuns wear, and we cannot really distinguish whether or not this is in fact the cassock that a priest wears or the uniform that a nun wears, because it seems to be a fusion of both. Also, you cannot see anybody inside wearing it. You can only see the clothing suspended. This, in a way, told me what the premise of the novel could be all about. It has something to do with nuns and priests. It has something to do with the church. It has something to do with their juicy histories and stories that are there hiding within their cloistered walls and all of that. So the image and therefore the book cover was in fact a very, very pulling factor for me when I picked up the book and formed my decision about completing that novel. And also, you look at the title of the novel. It's titled Odappu. So the word Odappu is very, very interesting. Okay. I do not know if you're familiar with the word, if there are Malayalis who are watching this. So this is not the kind of word that you see in day-to-day conversations today, right? But I knew that it was in fact used at some point in my house. Okay, it was the kind of word that I was familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. I knew that there was somebody in my house or some outsider who came barging into my house and threw this word around at my parents when I was very, very young, when our house still had red oxide floors. So that image is very, very strong in my head, but I cannot make out who or which relative of mine used that word. Which is why I looked up the word and I found that it could mean something called scandal. There is no direct English equivalent for the word Odappu in the English language, but it can be something close to the word scandal. But in Malayalam, there's a phrase that goes like this: Odappundakkirudhu. Odappundakkirudhu means you shouldn't be the one, or you shouldn't do acts, or you shouldn't indulge in behaviors that will drive someone astray, that will prompt someone to commit sin. So the phrase "Sodapundakaradu" was the phrase that was thrown around in my house a long time ago. And when I read the title of the novel, I was immediately brought back into that memory, and I knew this was going to be a very interesting piece of reading, which is why I took it up. And I'll tell you a little bit about the title that I've kept for my talk, Understanding Hometowns and Home Truths. So while I was reading the book, while I was in the act of reading, there were a lot of moments during the reading wherein I had made small discoveries about my own personal history. Not just from my familial history, but also about some things about where I am from. Okay, and so my act of reading transformed in those moments of discovery into an effort of understanding my own personal history, the worlds that I was familiar with. So this is why I've kept that title for my talk, Understanding Hometowns and Truths, Home Truths, because that's the journey that I had while I was reading Sarah Joseph's Odappu. And it is exactly these moments of discovery that I want to share with you all. And I'll try and talk about it using 3 specific passages from the novel. Okay, so there are, I've chosen 3 very specific passages, and I've translated them into English for your reading. So you are getting a translated version. Okay, and I'll try and share with you what those personal insights were. Okay, and those had to do with my own immediate familial history, also the kind of language that we spoke around in my community, and also the spaces that I was familiar with in my hometown. So we'll be going in those 3 directions, and I'll be using passages from the novel to share with you those insights about those 3 things. And it's also important to identify this novel as belonging to a genre called the genre of disclosure. So within this genre of disclosure, you will find a lot of novels and non-fiction pieces, biographies, autobiographies written by a lot of people who had close associations with the Syrian Christian Church and other denominations, who came out of these spaces, who decided to no longer be a priest, no longer be a nun, and write it all out. And since I also belong to that community, and I know that a major chunk of the population in Kerala are in fact, their lives are in fact tied to what happens in the church. So it must be, as a Christian and all of that, must have been very interesting for all of us to, get to know what is happening within the walls of a seminary and a convent and all of that. Because the church is such a big part of our lives, and any behavior, any criticism, and any incident that tends to question the authority of the church in our specific communities and regions, that geographical regions, are big issues and has the potential for scandal, right? And therefore, out of which, and so therefore, there are a lot of novels that subscribe or that talk about these things. And it is important that we locate this novel in that pattern as well. I have another novel of something similar to it, but I'm sharing the screen. I thought of showing it to you, but now I realize I can't do it right now. I'll do it when we are doing a Q&A later. So in order to go forward with my talk, I'll have to share a little bit of the plot line of the novel, so that novel is titled Odappu, and it loosely translates into scandal, and it is a story about two main characters whose names are there before you on the screen, Roy Francis Karikan and Margalita. So they were initially Father Roy Francis Karikan and Sister Margalita. So Roy Francis Karikan was a priest and Margalita was a nun. They fell in love and they've decided to leave the church and release themselves from the holy vocation of priesthood and sisterhood. And the novel traces their journey from the moment they leave the church and to the point where they finally meet each other, and then what happens afterwards. So all of these characters' names that you see, other characters' names that you see here, are big stakeholders in how their lives turn out. Okay, so when Father Roy or Roy Francis Karikan and Margalita finally leaves the church, but we get to know of the story mostly through the point of view of Margalita, because she is the one who's making the bigger journey here. We see her leaving the convent, removing her nun clothes, and then we see her loitering around through a railway station, a hospital, and finally she gets to her house, her own family home, wherein she is locked in a pit of sorts that's usually used for ripening banana. Okay, because of the way her own family treated her, she decides to leave her own family home. At the first chance she gets, she leaves her house, and then she meets somebody called Yohanan Kasisha with the help of Roy Francis. She stays with Yohanan Kasisha for a long time, and then when their family is threatened by the people in the community for harboring somebody as tainted as Margalita, Margalita leaves Yohanan Kasisha's home and goes with Rebecca, who's a Pentecost. Okay, but Margalita cannot stand staying with Rebecca, so she even decides to leave her house and goes to the abode of Father Augustine, who would be termed as an unconventional priest. Okay, so Father Augustine stays in a forest in a very, very small hut, and he doesn't follow the strictures of the church. He is another person who's left the church and decided to live his own spiritual life on his own terms. So Margalita goes to him and helps him with the things that he is doing. But while she is in Father Augustine's presence, Roy Francis Karikan makes an appearance again and takes her finally and decides that they should live together. Okay, and then they start living together. But Roy Francis Karikan is still a little, what do you say? A little not sure about his decision of leaving the church because of a lot of reasons. He doesn't have that kind of resolve that Margalita has. So what happens in the end is that Margalita gets, I'm spoiling the story for you, so sorry for that. Margalita gets pregnant and Roy Francis Karikan leaves her and goes to some parts in what I think I identified as northern India, and he's seen sitting before a church trying to make sense of the world and all of that. And we are left off with the image of Margalita in a very, very small house that they had rented, sitting on the floor with a belly and with another baby with her, that is Nanu. So we are reminded of the image of Mother Mary right there. So that's how the story ends. It's important for you to know that the passages that I've used to deliver my personal insights about the novel came from a lot of my personal stories. Okay, so I'm the type of person who's very, very part of a community. And whenever people ask me about my hometown, I end up romanticizing it and speak very, very highly of it. So it took a novel like Kodappu for me to start looking at my own socio-cultural location a little critically and detach myself from these emotions that I have about my hometown and look at it from a different point of view. And so all the passages that I've chosen is coming from that engagement with detachment that novel like Kodappu initiated in me. Okay, so I will start off with those passages. So you have the translation before you in English. So this part of the novel talks about somebody called Abe Lamma. Abe Lamma is Margalita, our main character's friend and confidant. She is also a nun. And this part talks about why she became a nun. Okay, so please be, this is a translation and it's one of the boldest things that I've ever done in my life. So yeah, so that's just the disclaimer I'm displacing before you. I'll be reading the same passage in Malayalam. So those of you who can understand the language can listen to this. ആബേൽ അമ്മയ്ക്ക് ഉടുപ്പ് കിട്ടിയത് 11-ാം വയസ്സിലാണെന്ന് പറയുന്നു. 13 മക്കൾ, മൂത്തത് 5 പെണ്ണ്, പിന്നെ വരിയായി 7 ആണുങ്ങൾ, അവസാനം ഒരു പെണ്ണ്. 15 പറ കൃഷി, 2 എരുമ, അധ്വാനിച്ചുണ്ടാക്കാൻ അപ്പൻ ഒരാൾ മാത്രം. മൂത്ത പെൺകുട്ടികളെ 5ആളെയും എതുക്കുംതാക്കിൽ കൊണ്ടുചെന്നാക്കി. ആബേൽ അമ്മയായിരുന്നു മൂത്തത്. വീട്ടിലേക്ക് തിരിഞ്ഞു നോക്കിയാൽ ഒരു ഗതിയുമില്ല. ആങ്ങളക്കുട്ടികൾ പഠിച്ചു വളർന്നാലായി. ഓരോ കൃഷിനാശങ്ങളിലും അപ്പൻ വരമ്പത്ത് തളർന്നിരുന്നു. പെറ്റുപെറ്റ അമ്മ തളർന്നു. ആബേലമ്മ ഉടുപ്പ് സ്വീകരിച്ചു. താഴാതികളെ ഉപദേശിച്ചു. നമ്മുടെ വീട്ടിൽ ഗതിയില്ല മക്കളെ, ആശ അടക്കം ചെയ്തു. വല്യേച്ചിയുടെ വഴിയെ പോയി അന്നംകുട്ടി, കൊച്ചു ത്രേസ്യ, ചെറുപുഷ്പവും റെജീനയും. അതുകൊണ്ട് അപ്പന് കിട്ടിയ ആശ്വാസം ചില്ലറയല്ല. കുടുംബത്തിനുണ്ടായ പേരും പെരുമയും കുറച്ചല്ല. 7 ആങ്ങളമാർക്ക് കിട്ടിയ സാമ്പത്തിക സമാധാനം ചെറുതല്ല. താഴെയുള്ള കുഞ്ഞനീത്തിയുടെ കല്യാണം നടത്താനും പറ്റി. ആബേൽ അമ്മയ്ക്ക് ദൈവവിളി ഒരു സാമ്പത്തിക ഇടപാടായിരുന്നു. So I've tried my best to be as faithful to what is being said in the Malayalam bit in the translation. So I hope there are no, too many digressions. So there's a reason why I've taken this very, very specific passage, right? I've always had a strained relationship with my grandmother, my father's mother. So my father also belongs to a family that is very, very big, like Abelamma's. So my father's family has 15 children, out of which my father was the 15th child. And he was also a seminarian at one point in his life for a very, very long time. It was only at a certain cusp of their seminary life that he decided to leave and live life the way he wanted to. And I blame my grandmother for it. I used to blame my grandmother for it because there was this idea that if you've had a lot of children, you have to, ship 2 or 3 of them off to these conditioning convents and decide that they become messengers of God and servants of God and all of that. And the lot was on my dad because my grandmother made a promise to some saint in some church that if her 15th child is a boy, he would be sacrificed to the god as a priest. And a significant part of my father's life was spent trying to deliver this promise. But while I was reading the novel, and I saw multiple references to the rationale behind people choosing to serve God by becoming priests and nuns, I kind of reconciled with my grandmother. I'm not saying I'm not angry at her anymore, but I understood where she's coming from. I understood a little why she was obligated to make certain choices, because I was fed with the information about a specific kind of community, that is a Syrian Christian community, and the socio-cultural and economic practices that they are a part of if their lives are tied to the church. So in that way, while I was reading the novel, I've had a moment of reconciling with my late grandmother, and that significant part of my life and my personal history was a little bit more revealing and became a little bit more okay to me. I'll move on to the second paragraph. Just give me a moment. Okay, so this is a smaller paragraph, and you can see perhaps a foreign word for you, and that's the word supredati. It simply means mother superior. Okay, so supredati is the term that somebody would use to refer respectfully to a mother superior, and it's like, you know, a conjunction between the word superior and edatti in Malayalam. So there are two languages in play there. So you can take a moment and read it. I'll read the Malayalam one. Just give me a minute. ആരെ കണ്ടാലും സുപ്രേഡത്തി വീട്ടുപേര് ചോദിക്കും. വീട്ടുപേര് പ്രസിദ്ധമായതാണെങ്കിൽ സുപ്രേഡത്തിയുടെ ഇറുക്കിപ്പിടിച്ച മുഖം തെളിയും. ആ വലിയ തറവാടിയോളാ, എനിക്കറിയാം. ഒരുപാട് സ്വത്തുള്ള കൂട്ടരാ. എൻ്റെ അമ്മാമ്മേരെ അപ്പാപ്പൻ്റെ. അങ്ങനെ എന്തെങ്കിലും ഒരു ബന്ധവും ആ തറവാടി ലക്ഷപ്രഭുക്കളോട് സുപ്രേഡത്തിക്ക് ചാർത്തിക്കാട്ടാനുണ്ടാവും. So if you've done reading the English bit, I'd like to make a point right there. So in the reason why I have pulled out this specific passage from the novel is because it talks about a very, very prevalent phenomena of asking people's family names in Christian households. And I am not a stranger to that. In fact, all my life I've been identified more by my family name, by my own name, or my father's or mother's names. And if you look at it, you would identify that family name is something like an identity marker. It would help someone who asks your name to discover whether you are a Christian from an old Christian family, or if you've converted to Christianity recently, which socio-economic class you belong to. Basically, it will help you identify your caste also, right? So I've had moments in my life when I've been faced with the same thing. I remember people asking me for my family name, and when I utter it, people's eyes would light up, and when I say my mother's family name, and those eyes are no longer lighted, it would just dim back and shrivel back into their corneas. And I've realized how these things work. But it's important to understand the family name phenomena in the context of the story as well. So Margalita belongs to an aristocratic Christian family, while Father Roy Francis Karikan belongs to a lower socioeconomic class. So I think one of the reasons why Roy Francis Karikan had a difficult time with the decisions that he made about leaving the church and staying with Margalita and finally leaving her had a lot to do with family names. The reason I say this is because Father Roy Francis Karikan's father, named Kunjuvari Detan, had a lot riding on his son being a priest. at one point in the story, we hear that Roy Francis Karikan is expected to become a vicar of a parish, an authority figure in the parish, right? And what happens is that Kunjuvari Detan, that is Roy Francis Karikan's father, becomes extremely excited, and he finally is able to feel a sense of freedom from the oppression that he has been facing because of the fact that he belonged to a lower socioeconomic class. He is somebody who carries loads for living in the local market, and when he hears that his son is in fact named to become a vicar of their church, he paints his house white. He buys jalebis and laddus. He goes around town informing everyone of his son's achievement to gain a little bit of respect and to finally lift the name of their family. But what happens in the end is that Roy Francis Karikan goes to their house, Kunjuvari Detan's house, and tells that he wants to marry Margaleta. All hell breaks loose, and we see Kunjuvari Detan committing suicide. So it's important that these phenomena, these very, very politics that come outside, that come with family names, have to be interrogated. And there have been so many moments in my past, in my familial history, where I've faced similar moments, and I've never looked at it twice. Okay, in that way, when I look at it from that point of view, while reading through this specific passage, it took me back to many such moments in my past, and prompted me to ask certain questions, certain uncomfortable questions that I've never raised before. Moving on, the next thing that I want to talk about has to do with the language in the novel. I haven't mentioned it, but it is important that you know that the language, the Malayalam, in the novel is a very, very specialized Malayalam. All the dialogues are in the Thrissur dialect, the Thrissur regional dialects of Malayalam. So if there are people who know, then very good. But so when you have dialects playing a big role in the construction of a narrative, it becomes even more difficult to translate. But which is why I haven't taken their translation up much. But what I want you to focus on is what happened to me when I was reading through these dialogues, and I was suddenly inundated with a lot of phrases that were familiar and unfamiliar to me at the same time. So like I said, the entire novel is written in the Thrissur dialect, and I was able to understand it because my hometown is between Ernakulam and Thrissur. It's named Angamali, okay? And our language is also very distinct, and I've been made aware of that once I went outside of my hometown for further studies and all of that. So a lot of those dialectical influences have been there in my language as well. So a lot of the phrases were easy for me to understand, and because they were familiar. But what was interesting was the presence of a lot of familiar phrases. Okay, a lot of familiar phrases that I used to use a long time ago. So when I was reading through the novel, I found a lot of phrases that I had used as a kid. Not just me, my immediate family and neighborhood and all of that, they have always engaged in a lot of such phrases. But I found that we do not use it anymore. So in the act of reading, I was taken back to a lot of conversations, a lot of phrases, a lot of words that used to effortlessly flow in and out of our conversations. And I realized that these are not in currency now in my language. And when I digged at it a little deeper, I kind of understood why. This might be a little inconclusive. And I talked to my dad about it. So you can see some of the phrases on the screen. Phrases like Punyalati. We used to call somebody Trishuta Punyalati all the time while we were young. You have a phrase like Chedam, that means problem. Chedatiyar, we used to refer to my aunt who passed away as Chedatiyar. Idin the Pranda, Sukedu, Palliyum Pattakarum, Vakkelum Velambalum. These are only very few. There are numerous in the novel that used to hold such significance, such currency in my conversation while I was young. And I realized that why those interactions took place in the first place. Because when I talked to my dad, he said that, yeah, we used to use these phrases. You are absolutely right. And he said, one of the reasons why we haven't been using these phrases must be because these belong to the lingo of the older generation mostly and not ours. And since we do not live with a lot of old people, we do not come across these terms as easily, although I do live with my grandmother. But most of these phrases were thrown around by my uncle who used to live with us a few years ago before he passed away. And therefore, we were familiar with these spaces, and therefore these phrases were used in much more, in a lot of ways, right? And I was taken back to those times. I was taken back to these very words, and the act of reading also became an act of reclaiming certain parts of a language that I felt I was in fact losing. So I've decided that whenever I talk to people who belong to the older generation, and whenever I feel that they use words that are no longer in Causerie, I will make it a point to write it all down. And that's a project that I've already started, and I've done with the book as well. So the last point that I've made, the last point that I would like to make has to do with these two last slides. And it has to do with the spaces that I was familiar with in my hometown. So this last bit of description that you see before you, that starts with "It's raining here." That's a description of the Angamali railway station. So the Angamali railway station is just 1 kilometer away from where I live. And it's a place that I'm extremely familiar with. And if somebody asks me any detail of that place, I would be able to answer it. And it's such a familiar space. And I've understood that space as a place of constant movement and motion. A lot of crowd and all of that. So, but while I was reading Sarah Joseph, she rendered that very familiar space in a very different light to me, which is why I've chosen this passage. So this is a space that I was extremely familiar with, that I took also pride in for knowing minute details and all of that. But when she wrote about that space, it became a newer, more revealing world for me. So the description of the station, the railway station, goes for more than 2 pages. So I wasn't able to translate the whole thing, but there are parts before you, and I'll be reading out the Malayalam bit here. പ്ലാറ്റ്ഫോമിൽ പഴുത്തതും പച്ചയുമായ പ്ലാവിലകൾ ചിതറിക്കിടന്നിരുന്നു. ഉണങ്ങിയ കമ്പുകൾ കൊണ്ട് അവയിൽ പച്ചച്ചു നിന്നിരുന്ന ഇത്തിക്കണ്ണികളും ഇത്തിക്കണ്ണികളിലെ ചുവന്ന പൂക്കളും ആരോ എടുത്തു വെച്ച പുഷ്പാലങ്കാരം പോലെ അങ്ങിങ്ങി കിടക്കുന്നു. താവളം നഷ്ടപ്പെട്ട് നെട്ടോട്ടം ഓടുന്ന പുളിയുറുമ്പുകൾ. എവിടെ നമ്മൾ താവളം തിരിയും? ഭൂമിയിലേക്ക് ഉറ്റുനോക്കി അവൾ നടന്നു. വണ്ടി ഇറങ്ങിയവരെല്ലാം മഴവെള്ളം പോലെ ഒലിച്ചുപോയി. വണ്ടിയും കൂക്കി വിളിച്ച് പാഞ്ഞുപോയി. മഴയും അതിൻ്റെ ദൂരദേശങ്ങൾ തേടി അകന്നുപോയി. മർഗലീത്ത ബാക്കിയായി. So that's the first bit that you can see before you on the screen. If you've done reading it, I'll have to change the slide. Okay, and this is the next bit. സിമന്റ് ബെഞ്ചുകൾ നനഞ്ഞു കിടക്കുന്നു. ചിലതിൽ വെള്ളം കെട്ടി നിൽക്കുന്നു പോലുമുണ്ട്. മർഗലീത്തയും ആകെ നനഞ്ഞിട്ടാണ്. ദേഹത്തു നിന്ന് പുറപ്പെട്ടിരുന്ന നാറ്റം നനവിനോട് ചേർന്ന് ഇരട്ടിച്ചിരിക്കുന്നു. ഒരു ദിവസം പരിചരിക്കാതെ വിട്ടാൽ ഇങ്ങനെ നാറുന്ന വസ്തുവാണല്ലോ മനുഷ്യരുടെ ഉടൽ. കഷ്ടം. എന്നാലും മർഗലീത്ത പതുക്കെ അതിനോട് ഇഴുകിച്ചേർന്നുകൊണ്ടിരുന്നു. തീവണ്ടി മുറിയിലെ കണ്ണാടിയിൽ കുറെ നേരം അവൾ നോക്കിക്കൊണ്ട് നിന്നു. കന്യാസ്ത്രീയുടെ വേഷത്തിലല്ലാതെ അവൾ അവളെ കാണുകയാണ്. മുക്കാൽ ഭാഗവും നനഞ്ഞൊരു ബെഞ്ചിൽ ആരോ എണീറ്റു പോയ ഇളം ചൂടിന്റെ പാടുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. മർഗലീത്ത അവിടെയിരുന്നു. വിശക്കുന്നു, വയറെരിയുന്നു. കത്തുന്ന ഒരു ഉടുപ്പ് പോലെയാണ് വയർ. എന്തെങ്കിലും കൊടുത്തില്ലെങ്കിൽ അത് മർഗലീത്തയെ തിന്നും. റെയിൽവേ ക്യാൻറ്റീനിൽ നിന്നാവണം കടുക് വറുത്തിടുന്നതിന്റെ ചൂടുള്ള മണം തണുത്ത വായുവിൽ പരന്നു. മർഗലീത്തയുടെ വയറ് കൊതിച്ചു. വായിൽ വെള്ളം നിറഞ്ഞു. തെക്കോട്ടും വടക്കോട്ടും വണ്ടികൾ പോയിക്കൊണ്ടിരുന്നു. ചരക്ക് വണ്ടികളും പാസഞ്ചർ വണ്ടികളുമുണ്ട്. എക്സ്പ്രസ്സുകളുമുണ്ട്. നിർത്താതെ പോകുന്നവയുമുണ്ട്. വന്നിട്ട് പോകാനുള്ള ലക്ഷണമൊന്നും കാട്ടാതെ കിടക്കുന്നവയുമുണ്ട്. തീവണ്ടികൾക്ക് മാത്രമുള്ള മുഷടൻ മണവുമായി അവ മർഗലീത്തയുടെ മുന്നിൽ നിൽക്കുന്നു. നിർത്താതെ പാഞ്ഞു പോകുന്നു. വെറുതെ കൂവി പേടിപ്പിക്കുന്നു. So that's where I've left it. I'm not really happy with this translation, but this is a scene where Margalita, in the beginning part of the novel, is seen just walking around the railway station because she took a train from the Thrissur railway station and just got down at the Angamali railway station. And this is description of that station. And it the reason it completely defamiliarized to me what I thought or how I had perceived the station to be. So in this way, the novel opened up a lot of things that I've never looked at before. In terms of language, it tried to help me remind myself of some of the language that I might be losing, in terms of the spaces that I was familiar with. It tried to tell me there is more to the spaces than what I think of it to have. And it also helped me interrogate a lot of moments in my own life with respect to my family and immediate community. So these are the things that I wanted to share with you all. Thank you all for staying and listening to me. Thank you so much. I'll just stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Maya.
Yeah.
That was lovely. Am I echoing?
No.
Okay, great. So I have one or two questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So, oh, I am echoing. My YouTube is off, ma'am. Sure. Is this better? Okay, great. Yeah. So I have one or two questions. The first question is, you're talking about learning about your personal history through a book, right? Is there a difference when you learn about your personal history through a book written in Malayalam versus when you read a book about Kerala written in English, like God of Small Things, for example?
That's a very, very nice and heavy question. I think, yeah, there is. I've always, when I remember reading The God of Small Things, and I've had moments when I wondered, okay, who will talk about my hometown like this one day and all of that. And I've thought, okay, will it sound better in English or in Malayalam? And I was caught in a conflict. I've had that thought before. And I cannot really answer that question, but if I was given the platform to write about my town, I know that I would end up writing about it in English simply because I'm more used to writing in English. So that it has a lot to do with your pattern of writing as well, I think. But I would love to write the same thing in Malayalam, but I am scared that I wouldn't get the right dialect, I wouldn't get my town the way it's supposed to be and all of that, and I will make a lot of people angry for my depiction. So I'm not saying English is safer that way, but I do not know. I'm more comfortable to take the other language side than in Malayalam. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. My other question is about the translation. I was just wondering, what was the most challenging part about translating this story?
So, so there was. I'll tell you one thing. So like I told you, this book is full. All the dialogues are in a very very specific Trishur dialect. So there's no point because you can't really translate that. And some of the choices that we can make when you're translating is to make sure that some of the regional phrases are kept in certain places, and some of the words that the author may have coined because they found it funny or serious, we can retain it the same way in the English language. For example, I think I mentioned this. Let me just, a word like Sambathiga Samadhanam, I've translated it into economic peace for some reason because I found it funny, and I thought that the author wanted to convey the same thing. Like, the suffering in humor is something that you see throughout the novel, trying to tell. And certain names like Abelama, Supredati and all of that are very, very region specific way of calling people and naming them and all of that. I think those things you can retain. At the same time, you can also you can make the effort of trying to bring in the rhythm of the source language as well when you are translating it into English. And one of the very, very difficult words that I found was a word called edukundat. Okay, so this is something I didn't find in any Malayalam dictionary. This is something so my family made the effort of calling up people from the region and trying to get to know, because this is a word that was unfamiliar to all of us. But we finally found what it exactly meant. And edukundata means madham, okay, abbey or convent. And it's a very, very archaic way of naming the convent, but it was in use in the Thrissur region for a long, long time. And so that was a difficult, getting to the fact that there was archaic words used here was a little difficult because there wasn't anyone to ask about it. But finally we got it. And I think I used the word, so that's where my translation has failed, because it has a beautiful word like edukundatu there, and I've used the word, let me just check what word. Yeah, convent hostel there, which is such a fail. Yeah.
I enjoyed listening to your translations very much. I also enjoyed listening to you read the Malayalam because it made me feel at home.
Okay, that's so sweet, Shefali.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much, Maya. That was really lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you. So for our next causerie, we have Professor Drishti Rakhra, and the title of her causerie is Writing in July. Professor Drishti Rakhra is a reader and a writer, and she's also got this amazing ability of making other people into readers or writers. Every time I listen to her speak, I end up wanting to write after I've heard her. And I'm excited to listen to her because I know that after she's done, I'm going to have this desperate urge to write. So for that reason alone, and apart from all the other reasons, I am very happy to listen to Professor Drishti Rakhra speak. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Shefali. Okay, so the topic, the title of my causerie is Writing in July. Today I'll be speaking of this writer Miranda July, who is a very lovely writer, but she's not only a writer, she does lots of other things that are very interesting, and I'll talk about them one by one. But before I even start speaking of Miranda July, I just want to say a quick thank you to Vijeta ma'am for introducing this writer to us, just as she introduces all great writers to us. So I'll just share my screen now. Let me know if you can't see it. Okay. So where I approached this causerie, this session with the question of where does writing come from. In asking this, I'm asking myself also this question, and I'm also asking writers this question, particularly simply because I'm trying to figure out how to write, and especially to try and figure out if there is a way that I can make writing happen when it's just not happening and when it's refusing to happen. So, so where does this writing come from? The first question that this led me to was, who do you write for? When you write, I'm convinced that we always write for someone who lives in our head. This could be a version of ourselves um, that was a child that wasn't us, or this could be a version of someone else we knew, or it could be someone we hate or someone we don't hate. But essentially, what I think happens in writing or in creating anything, we always imagine an audience for us. This audience kind of becomes real when we when this writing then happens on social media. So by social media, I quite literally mean either WhatsApp stories or Instagram stories or Instagram posts or tweets or anything of the sort. So for the sake of the session and for the sake of writing forever, I'm going to assume now that everything we ever write, every word that we ever write, is as real as any other writing would be. So this would be a caption that you wrote in 2 minutes, or literally anything else, right? So this is the assumption we are making now. Um, I'll tell you a little bit about Miranda July. A lot of you might already know who she is, but in case you don't, Miranda July is this 40-something person who has done 500 things. So she grew up in the time of the riot girl movement in the US. Basically, the only thing that or the thing that I'm focusing on in speaking of this is simply so in this movement, what was happening was that there was this DIY ethic that was becoming more popular, that people were speaking of more. So this was a feminist movement in which the creation of art, the creation of any kind of artistic content, you had to do it yourself. So this idea, right, that if you're writing something, someone else takes the photos. This kind of went away a little bit within this movement, and the reason I mention this is because when we kind of work that Miranda July is doing, I was very curious because I was wondering, how does one person write so much in such different forms that are sometimes not related at all. So if you see on my screen, I have three names here. These are three projects that she's done, three of the very many projects she's done. So one is Learning to Love You More, which was a 7-year art digital project in which she assigned people, her audience, different tasks to do. So one day of the week, for example, she'd say wear only black out of paper, or something like that, and they would have to do it and take pictures or document this in some way. So that ultimately what happened was they created some kind of they created some kind of an exhibition of other people's work, right? So there's that. There's another project called We Think Alone, which is basically a project. Um, so Miranda July curated emails of all of these famous writers and very lovely people, and she asked them to send in emails, to send her their emails that they had written, um, during their lives. So, for example, an email to customer care, an email to your boss, an email to someone you love. It could quite literally be a love letter. So lovely writers. Some people are Sheila Heti and Edgar Keret. So she asked all of these people to send in their emails. The third project is called Somebody. This is an app she made when I found out that here was this writer who was also a filmmaker, who was also an artist, who was also an actor, has also made an app. Uh, a part of me wanted to go hide somewhere, but I've chosen to just be inspired by her. The reason I'm telling you all of this is because what this woman does with her work is to find connections, is to find and locate intimacy. I'll speak about her work a little bit more after I speak of her next project, which is Somebody. I'll show you a short video. Once I show you the video, you'll know what this app is. 1 second.
Instagram, hello, selfie. You look stupid in the jacket. Are you kidding me? Like a little puppy dog. Easy. You put out como I don't talk to me.
Okay, sorry, these women are fighting more than I thought they were.
Don't talk to me. Don't touch me, okay? Don't talk to me then. Fine.
Sorry about that.
That's what you're wearing? Like a little puppy dog. Talk to me then.
Blanca? It's me, Yolanda. I don't want to be in no fight with you, Blanca. You're my hunger. This is stupid. Come on, Bruja, look at me.
I don't want to. You know where the because he's trash. Old news, like to the left. By Jafar 2000 and what the big I love you. We're good. But you know what? What was that? She doesn't even talk like that. Abuelita. What are you thinking? Colombiana, not mexicana. Okay, she's going to jail for that. Like, seriously? Absolutely. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Okay. So basically, if you were confused, then I'm glad that you were confused. Simply because when I saw what this project was or whatever she was trying to do, I was also very confused. So you have to share my confusion. But basically, what's happening here is that this app is allows you to send messages to people through someone else. So if, for example, you want to break up with someone, which is actually the first story in this little trailer, then instead of just sending a text message, you can actually pick someone who can send this message to them. So it uses your location to also figure out if there are other people also using the app. So the people close to whoever you want to message, they will go and give them this message, right? So in this case, there were these two girls who were fighting. And they were having a kind of a petty fight, and they turned away from each other, and they didn't want to they didn't want to be the bigger person, essentially. So they called this. They said one of them selected this sweet little old woman who conveyed the message, right? So more than anything else, what's happening here is that someone else is using your words to say something that you might not be comfortable enough to say. If you noticed at the end of this little video that we saw, these girls are again being slightly catty, and they're yelling at that woman and saying that she's racist because she appropriated their accent and things like that. So so quite literally what Miranda July is doing is identifying or maybe just trying to figure out what happens if you take something as simple as a conversation or and add someone else into the mix. So this is something that she does with all of her work, including her other her writing also. So with her writing, with her films, with all of this, with all of her other projects, she's asking lots of questions. And these questions are in the form or always have something to do with loneliness, something to do with intimacy, something to do with isolation. So in fact, she herself has said that her work comes from this place of isolation, especially now and during the pandemic also, this is particularly relevant simply because we're all in some sense isolated. So all of our work is coming from isolation, right? So I'm quite interested to see how she asks different forms of the same question in different ways. So this is the main crux, or whatever you want to call it, of my session. I found this love story that she wrote some year not I didn't find it some years ago. It was written just last year, but I found it a few weeks ago when I was listening to this podcast. I was listening to this podcast of her with Jenny Odell, and Jenny Odell was asking her about this project between her and Margaret Qualley, who is a dancer, who is an actor. This person here is Margaret Qualley, and this person here is Miranda July. So what Miranda July and Margaret Qualley met at this function, and Margaret Qualley had just broken up with her boyfriend, and then some weeks after that, randomly on Miranda July's Instagram, this post came up. This post that you see here, this was the first post in a very confusing love story. And what I call a love story is actually just a series of posts that were put up on both of their Instagrams, both of these women's Instagrams. So first it begins with, if you can see the caption, it says, "Just when I think it's just over, she calls, I'm begging you." So this entire post is just a series of Miranda July kind of begging Margaret Qualley to stop calling her, because they have broken up, and Miranda July has a husband, she has a child, and she has a family. So everyone's kind of confused, because here is this writer woman who is famous, and she has a family, but now suddenly she's put up this post of her and this other woman having a FaceTime conversation. I was most taken by the form in which Miranda July chose to write this in, particularly because it seems very intimate, and I was struck by how intimate it is. So if you some posts later on, if you just swipe, we can't swipe here, but if you see it on Instagram, Margaret Qualley starts dancing. She does weird, slightly crazy things, which would amount to this idea of the crazy ex-girlfriend that has become, I don't know what it has become, but so she kind of creates that, right? And so this story begins with the breakup, and then they try to reconcile. They reconcile with the help of Jaden Smith, who randomly got involved in this love story. And so Miranda July actually writes. She actually writes the whole script for this. She writes dialogue. She actually gives prompts to Margaret Qualley and just asks her to do whatever she wants with the prompt that she's giving her. So in this way, they create this love story in the form of screenshots. I'm particularly interested with this form of the screenshot because I think it represents not only what Miranda July is doing with all of her work, but it also asks a very interesting question about how we understand intimacy and how we understand online spaces also. Online spaces like social media, like Twitter, like WhatsApp also, and also now in the case of online classes, also Teams, right? So what a screenshot does is it's essentially a screen capture. It captures a moment. In some sense, it works like a picture, but it's really not. And I'm trying not to explain what a screenshot is, because all of us, I'm quite sure, take screenshots. But so she chooses this form, and she chooses this form very interestingly, because when she puts up posts, people are allowed to comment. She doesn't. In between these love story posts, there are also other posts that she puts up about her life, about her books, about her family. And this is true for both of their accounts. So it seems very real in that sense. And so the story finally ends, and everyone's a little confused. But what everyone is asking is, did this really happen, or did you both pretend? This is an interesting question also that they were asked, and Miranda July also said later that when they were working on this together, because of the way in which they chose to do it, everything was real. And she says that the reason they even began this project was so both of them don't know each other, right? Margaret Qualley and Miranda July. But the reason that they began this project was simply they met, they decided to work, and but then the pandemic, no, not pandemic, that happened later. So they decided to work, but she was traveling. Margaret Qualley was traveling, so they couldn't meet before she was traveling. So they had a FaceTime call. So she says that a FaceTime call has this slightly intimate energy that um, that exists, and that is a little bit inexplicable, but it's there, right? So she wanted to do something with it. So when I mentioned the real not real bit, I'll show you why exactly. So this is one of the posts on from Miranda July's page. There is no audio here. So the Hazion Circle is a ritual that Miranda July comes up with, a kind of a peacemaking ritual. And in this story, Jaden Smith explains what the Hazion ritual is. So this Hazion ritual is meant to reconcile both of them, and but then as you can see, Margaret Qualley has left. So there is this moment of betrayal, and actually the conversation extends after this, but I've only taken a screen recording of this much. So you should see what Miranda July says also, because the moment is rather intimate. Because they both are supposed to get together, but then one of them has left, and the other one has to deal with the shock of her leaving. I'm particularly interested in this form only because, or not only because, but a few months ago, when on Twitter I came across this form of fan fiction called the social media fan fiction. If you belong to one of the years after 2000, or if you were born in one of the years after 2000, I think you'll be familiar with this. So a social media fanfiction is quite literally a series of screenshots, very much like this, that are created by fans to write fanfiction essentially. But more than even the form itself, I was quite interested in how I reacted to reading this, because I felt very taken by it, because essentially what we were seeing was conversations between two people in a form that in our engagement is very intimate. So what I'm referring to is getting a happy email, or getting a rejection email, or a message from a friend you haven't spoken to in a long time, and just seeing their name in your notification, and then kind of having your heart skip a beat. It's moments like these that art forms like this are really built upon, and I feel like this is something that Miranda July has also recognized, and I'm wondering what direction this is going to take. So this space that she's coming from, that she also herself says is kind of an in-between space that exists somewhere between voyeurism and the mundane. I say mundane, or she also says mundane, and I fully agree, because this form of the screenshot cannot be more boring. It cannot be more common in the way we experience content, especially now. For example, with students, if they've sent us an email and we haven't received it, they'll send us a screenshot with proof. So just in a way like that, right? So there's that. Then there's also voyeurism. So a lot of writers have spoken about the way in which social media functions, particularly with respect to how we make ourselves seen and how we want to be seen in social media. So this form, using this as an art form or using this as a tool with which to tell stories, really calls into question how much you want to be seen and how much you don't want to be seen. So it's ultimately, it's really a question of control, right? It's a question of how much you want to give and how much you don't want to give, in terms of your energy, your pictures, your writing, quite literally anything. So yeah, so I'm thinking of this in the form of the way in which we are used to, let's say, the form of the novel, or the form in the sense of us reading letters between two people or us reading emails between two people. I remember this podcast that I was listening to recently, in which Sally Rooney is writing about the form of the novel. She was talking about the form of the novel, and she says that she feels very anxious about this form because everyone around her seems to be going in different directions. And I was very interested by this, simply because, so she refers to other writers when she speaks of this other directions that people are going in, and she mentions Sheila Hetty, who has written this lovely book called Motherhood. Motherhood is written. It almost reads like a journal somewhere, and it almost reads in points in different places. But even with these two different forms that she's using, they are very deliberate. It took me some time to read that because I was very confused by what I was reading and I didn't know how to read it. Similarly, other writers also, Bernardine Evaristo, I think, has written Girl, Woman, Other, which is also in point form. So this the novel itself is changing form. So I think even this way of storytelling is just a way of adapting to this constantly changing. I've said the word form so many times, I'll try not to say it anymore. So this is what Miranda July says. I have this fantasy that we'll somehow think of social media and the online world as pandemic tools after this. We'll be so grateful for them. We'll understand that we were brilliant to have thought of this thing that is going to help us survive the many, many pandemics to come, but we won't feel quite as beguiled by them when there's not a pandemic because we'll have this association. I feel like we're also compelled to think of social media as something bad, and it definitely is bad. But there are also other ways of thinking of it, and I think whether we are noticing it, whether we want to acknowledge that this is happening, it's already happening without us, and it's interesting to see how we can engage with it or even choose not to engage with it, because it's become that inevitable, right? So this is what she says, and I'll end with this. This moment that we are in, this moment of creation, this moment of understanding social media as a tool, is actually the ultimate creative prompt, because you can do anything you want, but you can also do nothing. Yeah, so I will end with that, Shefali.
Thank you so much, Drishti.
Thank you.
That was very, very interesting.
Thank you.
And I do feel like writing now, so that's great. Thank you for that.
I'm relieved to hear that.
Thank you for that. Okay, so 2 questions.
Yeah.
My first question is related to something you spoke about in the beginning, and that's, who do you write for?
I have an audience in my head. This is an audience that that kind of was built when I was learning how to write, when we were studying in EJP. So it's a form of whoever I used to be then, and I think also the people I usually give my writing to read. So I mean, it's a combination, and at this point I don't usually show my writing to anyone until I'm happy with it, but that already happens, and this is true for, I think, what the other forms also of social media.
Yeah, I think that's true. I also, because I have people in mind when I write, and then I'll show it to them. And if they don't like it, even if everyone else likes it, if they don't like it, I have a big problem with the story.
Yeah, it's a big betrayal almost.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
why I wrote this for you? Even though
Yeah.
it wasn't for you, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, my other question is, so I'm very interested by this idea of her projects, right? About her projects of loneliness and isolation, and yet companionship at the same time.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
my question to you is a little difficult. Um, if you could do a project about loneliness and isolation and companionship at the same time, what would you do?
I already have a project in mind actually.
Oh, brilliant!
No, I'll definitely. I'm very intrigued by screenshots, and which is why I kind of spoke about them so much. And I feel like if I ever do anything like this, it'll be in that form. It'll be, I think, just an emulation of this, because that moment of anticipation, either when we're waiting for a reply, or if, for example, you see that someone has texted you but they've deleted a message, that I think that's as real as someone telling you something, or not telling you something. So I think that's something that I want to try and figure out how I can bring into my writing generally also.
That's lovely.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we'll end here. It's 5:20. Thank you so much, Drishti and Maya. I had lots of fun, and I feel like writing, and I feel like I've had lots of wisdom poured at me. So that's great. Thank you, everyone who's tuned in, and thank you for listening. We will continue to have these staff causeries as the weeks go by. Thank you so much, everyone. Goodbye.